Welcome to People and Profit. I'm Kate Moody. And this week I'm in Davos, where the World Economic Forum is meeting in person for the first time in over 2 years. The world has since been rocked by pandemic and war, and the International Monetary Fund has drastically scaled back its forecasts for economic growth this year, warning of persistently high inflation and food and energy insecurity. Kristalina, Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, thank you for being with us on France 24. You've been speaking this week about a confluence of calamities facing the global economy, bringing it to its biggest test since World War II. It's even more dire than your most recent economic outlook, which was back in April.
It is more dire because since we produced the outlook, some of the downside risks materialized. Tightening of financial conditions, appreciation of the dollar, slowing down of the Chinese economy, and a looming food crisis that is affecting, in particular, Africa and the Middle East.
We're here in Davos, where President Zelensky opened the proceedings with a call for more support for Ukraine. Is he getting the support that he needs, in your opinion?
We have seen tremendous mobilization of support for Ukraine. Just in April, we have concluded that Ukraine would need $5 billion a month to sustain the functioning of the state. And we called together for raising this money primarily as grants. During the G7 finance ministers meeting, an astonishing $20 billion were committed. And what does that mean? It means that pensions and salaries will be paid, hospitals will work, and there will be a confidence boost in the population of Ukraine. What is the alternative? They need to then go to monetary financing, in other words, printing money to pay salaries. Just imagine the chaos that would create, and also hyperinflation that brings down the spirit of the Ukrainian people that has been holding strong. So we now have guaranteed 4 months, and over time we expect that the part of the Ukrainian economy that is not affected by the war would start up functioning at a higher level. As of now, about 70% of economic activities are back to normal in that part of the country, and then we expect to see remittances coming from the Ukrainians that moved outside of Ukraine, but of course care for the well-being of their families, and that may reduce the demand for financial assistance.
I want to zero in a little bit on the food crisis. It's a problem that's been building for several months, really, but has really worsened since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What is the immediate priority in addressing this, and what can we do to avoid it happening again?
Well, we learned from 2008 what needs to be done. Very strong international mobilization to prevent the food crisis from virtually killing people. Why we are in such a tough spot now? Because on one side we have climatic events in the Horn of Africa, in the Sahel, in India most recently. They have reduced output from the harvest that was expected. And on top of it, we have a withdrawal of supplies from Russia and Ukraine, two major grain producers. What can be done and what must be done fast? One, we have to press against trade restrictions. Now, nearly 30 countries are restricting exports of food products. This is only making a crisis worse. Two, speed up production where this is still possible. It is still possible to provide credit lines to farmers to produce more, but it has to be done very quickly. And three, mobilize financial assistance and then put purchasing plans on scale, aggregate demand from small countries so they can be credibly putting their requests for food and payments behind it. We, of course, are prepared to be part of the financial solution, as we have always been.
So these are some really disparate challenges that we're talking about here. Inflation, we've got food and energy insecurity, we've got climate change, all on the backdrop of war. How can governments approach this in a coherent manner?
Well, the most severe difficulty governments face is that it is indeed crisis upon a crisis, and we have not learned how to deal with multiple crises at the same time. Holistic approach requires to build resilience to shocks because we are living in a more shock-prone world. More of these shocks are going to come. What does that mean? Well, first, resilient people, educated, healthy, and with a system of social protection that helps them to overcome difficulties. Big lesson from the pandemic crisis and now from the commodity shock, that social safety nets have to be in place and target the most vulnerable. Second, resilient economy that goes beyond the banking sector, that is allowing for labor force to be more adaptable, to be initially in a position to look for changes in structures and adapt to those. And last but not least, resilient planet. If we don't deal with the climate crisis, we are going to see more of these shocks hitting us.
Europe, in particular, is facing an energy crunch at the moment. Are you a little bit worried that this search for short-term solutions might distract from this idea of a resilient planet, from the search for more sustainable energy sources?
Well, short-term, there is that risk. It only becomes a problem if we decide to open up more production of oil and gas and coal. If we do the right thing and we direct our attention to scaling up renewables, alternative energy, then this crisis may bring a better outcome. What we tell governments is, please don't take decisions today that you're going to regret tomorrow. For example, don't reduce taxes on fuel, rather than doing that, which would encourage inefficiency. Why don't you give checks to vulnerable households, financial support to vulnerable companies that is well targeted? It would be cheaper for you, and it would not harm our big goal to deal with the climate crisis.
The IMF has also been warning about, and I'm going to quote this because it's a bit of a complicated phrase, the permanent fragmentation of the global economy into geopolitical blocs. Does that mean you think that this is a turning point for the era of globalization?
There is a very high risk that after the hot war, we may slip into a cold war, into a world that is fragmented in different reserve currencies, different trading systems, different means of payment. If we do that, what we know the consequence will be, all of us would be poorer. Now, I don't want to be taken to say that there is no need for more attention to security of supplies. Both the pandemic and the war taught us this lesson. Economic efficiency has to include that security of supply, but it doesn't need to get to a point in which we are in separate blocks. What are the bridges we can build? Well, make a list of the problems that no bloc can resolve on its own. Climate, debt, trade that increases standard of living, payment systems in the digital world. If we zero in on the problems that we can only resolve as global community, we will succeed to overcome this risk of fragmentation.
We're in Davos, which really brings together leaders from the worlds of business and politics. Do you think there's enough cooperation between the public and private sectors in dealing with this myriad of challenges that we're facing at the moment?
What I'm impressed is how much private sector seeks the public sector and vice versa, because the problems are so severe and there is so much uncertainty that holding hands, building public-private partnerships is the only way to resolve these problems.
One last question for you. What lessons do you hope the international community will learn from this confluence of calamities?
That we have to be more resilient because these calamities are not going to be one shot in our lives. And that is only possible if we build strength together.
And are there any signs those lessons will in fact be learned?
I'm very hopeful they will be learned. Of course, the danger is quite elevated. The geopolitical tensions are quite significant today. And we have two choices. One is to surrender and then let the inertia to take us into a world of more poverty, more insecurity, and less ability to solve big problems. The second one is to persevere, and for international organizations, for global companies, this is our raison d'être. We have to do what we owe our members, and that is build the bridges they need for a better future.
Kristalina Georgieva, thank you so much for speaking to France 24.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for this week. Thanks for joining me here at the World Economic Forum. Don't forget you can find this and our previous programs on our website, and you can get in touch on social media. Until next time, thanks for watching.